Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my greatest honor and privilege to be speaking to you today. I'm trying to manage the tech here because I thought if I put the laptop here, you won't be able to see me, so yeah, okay. So I'll ride on all the protocols that were observed before me, just in case I miss any distinguished guests. But thank you so much for all the remarks that have been given, and they take me very well into the presentation that I'm about to present. But first, let me also congratulate the SADC-GMI for staying the course in holding these groundwater conferences every year. I think it's an important platform that allows us to keep groundwater firmly on the agenda. And I think Groundwater Management Institute has a lot to be proud of in this regard. So, I'm supposed to move my own slides. Okay. So there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of groundwater. I mean, I'm sitting in a room full of experts from conjunctive water management to transboundary aquifers. There are so many elements of groundwater that we're still to understand and still to learn about. But in my presentation today, I'm going to speak to an area that is close to the work that WaterAid does, which is our mission, which is to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone, everywhere. And our programming is mainly based on groundwater because it is closer to the communities that we work with. And we find that groundwater has more or less good quality for us to provide communities with clean water. And we hope that this status remains for the foreseeable future. And that is why we are here today, to make sure that groundwater quantity and quality are sustainably protected. So I'll also focus on the growing threats to groundwater that we are seeing in local communities, because that is where we work, and talk a little bit about how communities can be part of the solution. I was even tempted to talk a little bit about groundwater quality because that is my original work area that I started off in the water sector, working on water quality. But I realized that there are so many other experts in the room, so I'll stick to local communities for this presentation. So historically, groundwater has been seen as a resource that is used by dispersed rural populations where it provides a clean and easier to access source of water. However, we have a crisis brewing in urban centers where municipal water supply services are failing to keep up with the growing demand. This is made worse, of course, by the existing challenges such as aging infrastructure and poor maintenance. Many residents have resorted to drilling private boreholes to ensure a reliable supply of clean water. This drilling, unfortunately, is often illegal or unregulated and is affecting local groundwater availability. Much of the irregular groundwater withdrawals are taking place in shallow aquifers, which are easier to access, but are also prone to contamination and depletion, especially in densely populated areas. Contamination can be from a number of reasons, such as industrial effluent or insufficiently treated domestic wastewater, agricultural runoff containing fertilizers, and so on. But in these urban centers, one key source of contamination is unsafe sanitation, stemming from poorly constructed pit latrines and septic tanks, which lead to fecal contamination of groundwater. Coincidentally, today, the 19th of November, is World Toilet Day. I hope many of us are commemorating this day. And the theme for this year is sanitation in a changing world. But in 2022, the theme was even closer to the topic that we are talking about today, and it was sanitation and groundwater, highlighting the need to invest in safely managed sanitation to protect groundwater. So allow me to digress a bit and talk about the challenges that we face with safely managed sanitation. Because we, as an African continent, we are lagging behind. 69% of our population has no access to safely managed sanitation, and this is a direct risk to the sustainability of groundwater. And as been mentioned by the previous speakers, climate change is one of the biggest risks to groundwater, because when surface waters fail, we default to using groundwater as a buffer. But as droughts intensify, there is need for more proactive drought planning to protect groundwater from overuse. However, without reliable data on groundwater trends, our efforts for sustainable use and appropriate policy responses are undermined. In cases where groundwater policies are well developed, enforcement is often lacking. And these are only a few of the threats that we see at the local level, and I'm sure that there are many more in the diverse local dynamics that we represent here. However, there is also a pressing need to look at the dangers of inequality when groundwater use intensifies and there are limited policies in place to safeguard the most vulnerable. Inequalities manifest when limited resources exclude parts of the population from groundwater access. It might be due to the prohibitive cost of drilling and pumping groundwater at deeper depths. For example, smallholder farmers and low-income households depend on shallow wells for irrigation and domestic use, but have limited means to chase down the water table. These households also face the challenge of likely drinking contaminated groundwater in the more polluted shallow aquifers, or even groundwater that is naturally unsuitable for drinking due to the presence of high levels of fluoride, arsenic, or salinity. In the southern African regions, some of us are familiar with pockets of saline groundwater, which are common in some communities, and most of these rural communities are left with no other option but to drink the saline waters. Studies are starting to show that there's increasing incidence of hypertension from drinking highly saline groundwater. So without government support, many of the poorer rural communities cannot afford desalination technologies to treat highly saline water. Women and girls who often have to worry about household water security suffer the most when wells run dry and there's no nearby alternative or nearby affordable alternative for clean water. So is the policy landscape keeping up with what is happening at the local level? When we speak of fit-for-purpose policies, we speak also of no one-size-fits-all. So what efforts are we driving to find the right fit for our context, connecting more closely with the local groundwater use challenges? In cases where groundwater policies are poorly enforced, the perception that groundwater is an unregulated resource is reinforced, making it difficult to change behaviors around groundwater use. Some users find the permitting system unfair and withdraw more than they should. And because competition around groundwater is less visible, it leads to poor enforcement yet again. At WaterAid, we have worked with communities in West Africa to strengthen water security and climate resilience, allowing communities to be involved in the allocation and planning of water resources. The Sahel region of West Africa is a semi-arid region characterized by droughts, and where 80% of the rural population relies on groundwater for domestic and agricultural use. Our approach included facilitating practical coordination of multiple sectors at the village scale, bridging the artificial silos that exist between agriculture, livelihoods, environments, and domestic water supply sectors. We provided training on the assessment of water and climate risks, data collection, and strategic planning, developing local water security plans. The planning process was inclusive, taking into account gender and social dynamics to reduce localized conflicts over water access. Similar work has just begun in Ghana, a country also facing challenges with regards to surface water pollution from small-scale gold mining activities. In this approach, one of the most complex tasks was coordinating across the different institutions, because groundwater is not an isolated resource. Its management requires an integrated approach for more sustainable outcomes. But as we observed, the fragmented nature of water governance in the region meant that competition for water resources was not effectively managed, so that seasonal water scarcity impacts were amplified, leading to conflict and inequalities in access. For decision-making, local institutions, as they manage their resources, need to coordinate within a broader framework of groundwater governance. So from village to basin level, community-led efforts in data collection and planning were supported by technical assistance from national and basin authorities. So now that we have seen the local challenges and the policy gaps and the role that communities can play in groundwater governance, I would like us to zoom out a bit and talk about groundwater in climate resilience at global and regional scales. One of the most significant climate risks that threaten groundwater security is droughts, and the Southern Africa region is no stranger to this, as we are still recovering from the 2023 and 2024 drought, which led to the scarcity of surface water resources. For example, in Zambia, the Kariba Dam, shared by Zimbabwe and Zambia, reached record low levels, leading to crippling power outages and disruptions to water supply. Climate change projections point to an intensification of such events. And although on paper, we do have plenty of groundwater reserves to support and buffer us during drought periods, if we are not more deliberate in planning for the future with groundwater in mind, we can lose out on the potential that groundwater holds to improve the socioeconomic conditions through food security and climate resilience. As we sit in this room today, I'm sure many of us are aware that COP30 actually is happening in Brazil. And this is an essential part of our conversation today as we talk about groundwater and climate resilience. One of the key areas that will be debated, that is being debated at COP30, is the Global Goal on Adaptation. This is the framework for global resilience, and it has 7 thematic targets, the first of which is to reduce climate-induced water scarcity towards climate resilience in water supply and sanitation. Many of the experts there will be trying to deliberate on the indicators that were developed to measure progress towards these thematic targets. And should these indicators be adopted, it means countries can measure their progress towards global resilience across multiple sectors. Local and national adaptation plans are the building blocks for measuring progress towards this collective global goal of resilience. And we have seen how local communities can lead solutions and improve coordination to tailor appropriate intervention. Regional policies have a critical role to play in this equation, central in mobilizing political will and developing equity and inclusion policies for groundwater development. As I conclude this presentation, I would like us to reflect on what it means to plan with groundwater in mind. From water supply to agriculture, groundwater plays a central role. And considering that more than half of the population on our continent relies on groundwater for domestic use, yet we still have millions more that are still to gain access, and even more that have no access to safely managed sanitation. And while we have these vast reserves of groundwater, we still need to increase our agricultural productivity exponentially, and groundwater will be the key ingredient for that to happen. However, these projections may not hold given the challenges that we are facing with increasing demand and reliance on groundwater, inadequate policies, slow response, and low enforcement. Climate impacts, on the other hand, are escalating with dire consequences for the 80% of our jobs that are water dependent. So what does this mean? It means that we have to act faster, we have to be more deliberate, and we have to act with urgency. I'll end with a few calls to action. Groundwater is a strategic resource, has been mentioned by the minister. It underpins economic growth, sustains livelihoods, and the health of many of our populations through domestic water, providing resilience against climate change. Indeed, groundwater security is climate resilience. And while there is still much to learn about groundwater, its occurrence, optimal development strategies, we know enough to start taking more decisive action now. and local communities have a role to play in understanding groundwater better to deliver more sustainable outcomes. Thank you.